My name is Elias. I'm 24, and the night I came home to find my room stripped bare still feels like a scene burned into my memory. Clothes that had once been folded in drawers were scattered on the damp grass like trash someone forgot to collect. My shoes, books, and even an old guitar I had bought with my first paycheck leaned crooked against the mailbox. And there was my dad, standing at the doorway with his arms crossed, his face set in that sharp, stone-carved expression I'd grown up fearing more than I'd ever admit. He didn't yell, didn't rant, didn't even give me one of his long lectures about how I was a disappointment. He just tossed the last box onto the lawn, dusted his hands, and said, "You're not welcome here anymore." Then he turned his back on me, like I was a guest who had overstayed my welcome rather than his son. I remember standing there, keys in my hand, looking at the house I grew up in and realizing I wasn't shocked. Not really. Hurt, yes. Humiliated, even more, but not shocked. For years, my dad's approval had been a moving target I could never quite hit. If I worked overtime, he said I was neglecting family. If I studied late, he'd call me lazy for not working more. No matter how carefully I tried to live, he'd always find a way to tilt his head, sigh, and remind me how much better my brother was doing, how much faster my cousin had climbed the ladder, how much more obedient the neighbor's kids seemed. That night was just the culmination of years of small cuts, years of being chipped away piece by piece until there was nothing left of me that fit his definition of a worthy son. It wasn't always this bad. Growing up, I remember my dad being strict, yes, but not cruel. He was a man who believed in rules and hard work, and I thought that if I followed the script, I'd earn his respect. But somewhere around high school, the comparisons began to sharpen. My younger brother, Caleb, was the golden child, athletic, charming, the kind of person teachers would gush about at parent-teacher conferences. I was quieter, more bookish, always working part-time jobs to support myself while trying to study. And while my mom tried to soften the blow with little reassurances, she was often silent when Dad tore into me. Her silence, I realized later, was its own kind of betrayal. The first hint that things were slipping beyond repair came the year I turned 19. I had scraped together savings from 2 jobs to buy a used car, nothing flashy, but mine. The day I pulled into the driveway, proud of finally having something to my name, Dad didn't even look at the car. Instead, he pointed at Caleb, who had been lounging on the porch, and said, "Now that's how you should carry yourself. Confident, easygoing. Not uptight like you." Caleb smirked and made some half-hearted joke, and they both laughed. I stood there, keys in hand, feeling like I'd stepped into the wrong script. It wasn't about the car. It was about me never being enough. From then on, things snowballed. Every accomplishment of mine was invisible, swallowed in the shadow of my brother's charm. I paid for most of my college tuition myself, but Dad said I was wasting money on books when I should be learning a trade like a real man. When I came home late from shifts, he'd lock the door and make me sleep in my car because a son who can't respect curfew doesn't deserve a bed. I learned to stop expecting fairness or even basic decency, but still I stayed. Because that's what you're supposed to do, right? You grit your teeth, you hold your tongue, you try harder. That's why, standing in front of the house with my life scattered on the lawn, I didn't argue. I didn't beg or defend myself. I just nodded, grabbed my keys, and loaded what I could into my trunk. There was a strange kind of peace in leaving without a word, as though silence was the only power I had left. I drove off into the night not knowing exactly where I was headed, but certain of one thing. I wasn't coming back. Not like this. But as the weeks turned into months, and the months into 8 long stretches of rebuilding my life piece by piece, something shifted. I worked harder than ever, not for Dad's approval this time, but for myself. I carved out a life that didn't depend on his nod or his rare, begrudging praise. I stayed quiet, didn't reach out, didn't explain where I went or how I was doing. And for a long while, there was silence from him too, until one day, my phone lit up with the first of many messages, then dozens more, until it reached 72 in total, each one more desperate than the last, each one ending with the same plea: "Please come back." That's when I realized the story wasn't over. Not even close. I didn't answer the messages at first. Part of me wanted to throw the phone across the room every time it buzzed with another "Please come back" or "We miss you." But another part of me, the scarred, younger version of myself that had always craved approval, read every word, turning them over like sharp stones in my hand. Because when I looked closer, I noticed something. Those messages weren't just apologies. They weren't even real apologies. They were carefully worded hooks, the kind my dad had used my whole life. Please come back, your mother is worried. We miss you, the family's not the same without you. Stop punishing us for one mistake. The same old script. He wasn't saying, I'm sorry I threw you out. He was saying, look at what you're doing to us. And that was when I felt the familiar knot of manipulation tightening again. To understand why those messages cut so deep, I need to go back to those months before I left, when the favoritism in my family had become so blatant it was almost theatrical. My brother Caleb wasn't just the favorite, he was the family's investment. Dad poured money into his hobbies, his car, his half-hearted business ideas. If Caleb wanted something, Dad found a way. But when I asked for help, once, just once, with tuition after my hours at work got cut, Dad laughed in my face. He said, if you can't pay for it yourself, maybe it's not worth studying. A week later, Caleb announced he was going on a trip to Miami with friends, and Dad handed him an envelope of cash like it was a rite of passage. It wasn't just the money. It was the way they spoke about us when we weren't in the room. Once, I overheard Dad telling a neighbor, Caleb, now he's got potential. Elias? He means well, but he'll never be more than average. I remember standing behind the door, my hands trembling, realizing that no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked, I'd never escape that label in his eyes. And when I confronted him about it later, his response was simple. If you don't like what I say, prove me wrong. That phrase haunted me. Prove me wrong. But whenever I tried, he moved the finish line farther away. The last holiday I spent at home before everything exploded made it painfully clear. It was Christmas Eve, and I'd saved up to buy gifts for everyone, even Dad. I'd spend hours picking out things they'd actually use, things I thought would make them feel cared for. When it came time to exchange, Caleb's gift, a cheap cologne set he'd grabbed last minute, was met with applause, laughter, even a toast to his thoughtfulness. Mine, Dad barely glanced at it before setting it aside. Later that night, when I asked if he liked it, he shrugged and said, it's fine. You could have saved your money. Those words stuck in my throat like gravel. So when I saw those 72 messages lighting up my phone months later, I couldn't help but hear the echo of all those moments. The manipulation was familiar, rehearsed. He wasn't reaching out to me as his son. He was reaching out because something in his world had shifted and he needed me back to balance it. Maybe Caleb had disappointed him. Maybe the image of the perfect family had cracked. Whatever it wasn't about love. It was about control. I still remember the first time he tried calling instead of texting. My phone buzzed on the table, his name flashing across the screen, and I just sat there staring. I didn't answer, but I listened to the voicemail. His voice, usually sharp and commanding, sounded thinner this time. Elias, he said, we need to talk. Don't be stubborn. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Just come home, and we'll sort things out. Caleb misses you too. And there it was again, that subtle twist. Not, I miss you, but you're being stubborn. Not, we were wrong, but you're making it harder. The same script, different stage. And yet, despite knowing all of this, I felt the tension inside me rising. Because while I had started building a life of my own, tiny apartment, steady job, quiet routines, I still carried the weight of those years on my back. I wondered if ignoring him made me as cruel as he had been. I wondered if maybe, just maybe, this time he meant it. But deep down, I knew better. I knew what was waiting for me if I walked back through that door. The favoritism, the cutting remarks, the constant reshaping of my worth into something I could never meet. And I knew something else too. The more desperate he became, the more unreasonable he would get. And I had no idea just how far he was willing to go to pull me back under his control. That realization hit me hardest the night my mom finally sent me a message of her own, one that made my chest tighten in a way Dad's never could. The message from my mom came late, just after midnight. I was lying on the couch in my apartment, half asleep with the TV buzzing low in the background, when my phone lit up. For a second, I thought it was another one of Dad's relentless texts. But when I saw it was from Mom, my heart gave that strange, uneasy jolt. Her message was short, almost too short. Elias, we need to talk. Your father made a decision about your things. Call me tomorrow. My things. I sat up straight, wide awake now, dread washing over me. I had thought everything was already gone. The clothes tossed on the lawn, the books and guitar I'd salvaged, the few boxes I had squeezed into the trunk of my car. What else could she mean? I called her immediately, but she didn't pick up. The next morning, I tried again. That time, she answered. Her voice was tight, almost whispery, like she was afraid someone might overhear. Elias, she said, your father, he sold the rest of your stuff. The boxes you left in the garage, the computer, your old files, even the desk you bought when you started school. He said you weren't coming back, so there was no point keeping it. I felt my chest cave in. My computer, years of work, photos, writings, everything gone. I had saved it in the garage because I thought maybe, just maybe, when things cooled down, I could come back for it. And my dad had just erased it all in a single, calculated move. Why didn't you stop him? I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. Her answer came after a long pause. You know how he is, Elias. Once he makes up his mind, there's no changing it. I didn't want to make things worse. I closed my eyes, feeling that old familiar anger, the kind that made my hands shake. Because this wasn't just about property. This wasn't about old furniture or boxes. It was about years of my life, memories, achievements, records, all treated like garbage. And hearing my mom excuse it, yet again, twisted the knife even deeper. She had always been the quiet one, the peacekeeper. But peacekeeping, I realized, was just another word for abandoning me when it counted most. Later that day, I confirmed it for myself. My cousin, who lived down the street, sent me a photo he'd taken of a yard sale sign in front of our house. Tables covered in random items, my old textbooks, framed photos, even the chest set my grandfather had given me before he passed. The caption underneath read, "Your dad's clearinghouse. Thought you should know." I don't know how long I sat staring at that photo, but when I finally looked away, something in me had changed. Up until then, I had carried a fragile thread of hope, that maybe things weren't completely broken, that maybe if I stayed away long enough, they would learn to value me. But watching strangers walk away with pieces of my life was the moment the thread snapped. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was betrayal. It was deliberate, personal. That night, Dad sent another message. This one was longer than the usual one-liners. You're being dramatic. Those things were just clutter, and you weren't here to take care of them. Caleb's moving into your old room, and we need the space. It's time you stopped acting like the victim and grew up. I read it twice, my vision blurring with anger. He hadn't just erased me from the house. He had replaced me. My brother, the golden child, was now sleeping in the room I had spent years calling mine, surrounded by the scraps of what was once my life. My dad hadn't just thrown me out. He had rewritten the script so I'd never existed there in the first place. I wanted to scream, to call him, to unload everything I had bottled up over the years. But I didn't, because beneath the anger, something colder was beginning to form, a resolve I'd never felt before. If my father thought he could erase me so easily, he was wrong. He could sell my desk, my books, my photos, but he couldn't take away the life I was building outside his walls. And for the first time, I wasn't just going to survive his cruelty. I was going to make him regret it. But before that moment of clarity came the hardest blow yet, the one that made me realize how much lower they were willing to go. And it arrived in the form of another message, this time from Caleb himself. Caleb's message came on a Sunday afternoon, when I was finally settling into the rhythm of my own life. I had just gotten home from a double shift, the kind of day that left me bone-tired but strangely satisfied, because unlike before, every dollar I earned was mine. Every small success belonged to me. I remember making a cup of cheap instant coffee, sinking into my couch, and then hearing the chime of my phone. For a moment, I debated ignoring it. But when I saw his name on the screen, I couldn't resist. The message was short. Smug. Thanks for the room, bro. Finally fixed it up the way it should have been. Don't worry, I tossed the old junk. Place looks great now. I sat there, staring at the screen, my jaw clenched so hard it ached. It wasn't just the words. It was the casual arrogance, the way he twisted the knife without even trying to hide it. My brother, the one who had always coasted on charm and favoritism, was now living in the room I had been thrown out of, surrounded by the ashes of my past. My old posters, the shelves I built by hand, the small things I had collected to make that space mine, they were gone. And now he was rubbing it in my face, like I had been some temporary tenant who finally made way for the rightful heir. I didn't reply. I couldn't. My hands shook too much to type. Instead, I scrolled through his social media later that night, something I had avoided since leaving home. And there it was, photo after photo of Caleb standing in what used to be my room. He had painted the walls a new color, rearranged everything, and filled it with sleek furniture Dad had obviously paid for. In one post, the caption read, "Finally got the upgrade I deserve." In another, someone commented, "Isn't that your brother's old room?" Caleb's reply was a smirking emoji followed by, "Not anymore." That was the moment I hit rock bottom. It wasn't just that I had lost my home. It was that I had lost my place in the family entirely. They weren't waiting for me to come back. They weren't missing me. They had erased me, painted over my existence, and handed it all to Caleb with a bow on top. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment, listening to the hum of the fridge and the occasional honk from the street outside. The loneliness pressed down on me, heavier than ever. For years, I had endured mistreatment because I still clung to the hope that I mattered to them. That one day, if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself enough, they'd see me differently. But now, I understood. I had never been the son they wanted. I had only been a placeholder until Caleb took center stage. The next few weeks blurred together. I went to work, came home, ate, and repeated the cycle. I didn't talk to anyone, didn't go out, didn't answer texts from the few friends who still checked in. I told myself I was too busy, too tired. But the truth was, I didn't know who I was outside of the constant battle for my family's approval. And without them in the picture, I felt hollow. But even in that emptiness, a quiet resolve began to take root. The kind that doesn't announce itself with grand speeches or sudden decisions. It was subtle, like embers glowing under ash. I started saving more aggressively, cutting out every unnecessary expense. I took on extra shifts, even when my body screamed for rest. And slowly, I began to piece together a plan. Not revenge, at least not yet. Just survival. Just the simple determination to stand on my own, so that when the time came, I would no longer need anything from them. In those silent nights, when the weight of everything felt unbearable, I made myself a promise. I would never again beg for a place in a family that had thrown me out. I would build a life so steady, so untouchable, that they could never take it away from me. It wasn't easy. There were days when I wanted to give up, when the memories of my dad's voice telling me I'd never amount to anything echoed so loudly I almost believed him. But I kept moving, step by step, shift by shift. And while I didn't realize it at the time, every small act of survival was also an act of quiet defiance. Still, I didn't know that my father's grip on control was loosening, and his desperation was only beginning to show. And when his desperation finally collided with the fragile life I was building, everything shifted. The first flicker of change came in the most unexpected way. I had been working at a logistics company as a warehouse assistant, stacking boxes and managing inventory. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and it paid my bills. One afternoon, my manager pulled me aside after a long shift and said, "Elias, you've got an eye for detail. You ever thought about moving up into operations?" I didn't know how to answer at first. Me, the one who had been told his whole life he was average at best. But she was serious. She told me a supervisor position was opening, and while it meant longer hours, it also came with better pay, benefits, and a chance to grow. For the first time in years, someone saw value in me. Not because of Caleb's shadow, not because of Dad's impossible standards, but because of me. I took the job. The first few weeks were tough, learning schedules, managing people, making quick decisions under pressure. But something surprising happened. I thrived. I found myself solving problems on the fly, coordinating shipments, and even earning the respect of workers twice my age. For once, I wasn't the overlooked one. I wasn't less than. I was the one people turned to when things got complicated. The pay raise meant I could finally move out of the cramped studio apartment. I found a modest one-bedroom across town, nothing fancy, but when I walked through the door with the keys in my hand, it felt like the world's quietest victory. No one had handed it to me. No one could take it away. It was mine. With the stability came confidence. I reconnected with old friends I'd pushed away during my lowest point. I stopped dodging their calls and started showing up again, grabbing coffee, laughing, remembering what it felt like to belong somewhere. And slowly, the emptiness I had carried since leaving home began to feel less suffocating. At work, I pushed myself further. I signed up for training courses, learned more about supply chains and logistics systems. Before long, I was the one proposing solutions in meetings, and people actually listened. My manager, impressed with my progress, started hinting at more opportunities down the line. For the first time in my life, The future didn't feel like a wall closing in. It felt wide open. And then, almost by accident, I stumbled into something bigger. A client company I had worked with regularly needed extra help coordinating a major shipment. I stayed late, worked through the night, and made sure everything ran smoothly. The head of their team noticed, and after a brief conversation, they offered me a position with their firm, better salary, better growth, more independence. It felt surreal, like doors were swinging open faster than I could walk through them. Within a year, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. I had savings in the bank, a reliable car, and the kind of independence I had only dreamed of. The voice of my father telling me I'd never amount to anything grew quieter each day, replaced by the steady hum of progress. And yet, even as I built this new life, their presence lingered. Dad's texts hadn't stopped. If anything, they had grown more frequent and desperate. It's been long enough. Stop holding a grudge. Your brother asks about you. Each one dripped with the same mix of manipulation and entitlement, as if my silence was the real betrayal. But here's the thing, I didn't need him anymore. For the first time, I held the power. I had proven him wrong, not by shouting back, not by begging for recognition, but by living a life without him. And that power, the quiet, steady kind, was intoxicating. It wasn't just about money or independence. It was about control. For the first time in my life, I wasn't at the mercy of my father's approval. I could choose when to answer, when to ignore, when to walk away. And deep down, I began to wonder what it would look like to flip the script entirely, to let him see what he had lost. That thought grew stronger with every unanswered message, every voicemail deleted. And it grew even stronger the day I saw my brother Caleb's name appear on my phone again. This time not to gloat, but to ask for help. It was a Tuesday evening when Caleb's name lit up my phone again. But this time, there was no smug caption attached, no photo of him flaunting my old room. Instead, it was a plain text. Can we talk? It's important. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of trick, another jab meant to drag me back into the cycle of comparison and humiliation. But something about the wording felt different. Urgent. Hesitant. Against my better judgment, I replied with a single word, why? His answer came quickly. Things aren't going well here. Dad's been different. Can we meet? I almost laughed. The same brother who had paraded through my old space like it was a prize, who had never once defended me when Dad tore me down, was now reaching out. But curiosity got the better of me. A week later, I agreed to meet him at a quiet coffee shop downtown. When I walked in, I hardly recognized him. Caleb, who had always carried himself with that effortless swagger, looked worn down. His clothes were as stylish as ever, but his posture was slumped, his eyes heavy with something I had never seen on him before, fear. He didn't waste time. Elias, he said, leaning forward, Dad's in trouble. The business, it's collapsing. He made some bad investments. He's been borrowing money left and right, and now people are asking questions. I let the words sink in. Dad, the man who had mocked me for being average, who had worshipped success like a religion, was failing. The same father who had sold my belongings without a second thought, who had erased me from his home, was now watching his empire crumble. And I asked, keeping my voice even. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. He's desperate. He keeps saying if you came back, it would fix things. That you'd help out. Maybe take on some of the debt. He thinks you've been saving, maybe earning more than you let on. There it was. The real reason behind those 72 messages. The desperate voicemails. The sudden, almost pleading tone. It had nothing to do with missing me. Nothing to do with family. It was about money. It was about control. He had thrown me out when I was of no use to him. And now that his foundation was cracking, he wanted me back as a pillar to hold it up. I didn't answer right away. I let Caleb keep talking. He told me about arguments at home, about Dad snapping at Mom over small things, about the tension that filled the house like smoke. Caleb confessed he was scared, that he had relied too heavily on Dad's support and now found himself cornered. It was strange listening to him. For the first time, I wasn't the powerless one. I wasn't the one begging to be heard. Caleb, my father's golden child, was sitting across from me, practically wringing his hands, while I sat calm, steady, untouched by the storm tearing through their lives. And in that moment, I realized something important. I had leverage, not just over Caleb, but over Dad himself. The years of humiliation, the dismissal, the betrayal, it had all flipped. They needed me now, and I didn't need them. That was power. Quiet, deliberate, undeniable power. When I left the coffee shop, Caleb tried one last time. "Think about it," he said. "Dad keeps saying family has to stick together. He'll forgive everything if you just come back." I smiled faintly, not out of amusement, but out of the bitter irony of it all. Dad wasn't offering forgiveness. He was begging for mine, though he'd never admit it. And that gave me the upper hand in a way I never imagined I'd have. As I walked back to my car, the plan began to form. Not fully, not yet, but the outline of something sharp and satisfying. I wasn't going to be the desperate son standing in the rain outside my own house anymore. This time, I was going to decide how the story ended. And when I finally checked my phone that night, there it was again, another message from Dad, this one longer than usual. "Elias, come home. We need you. I made mistakes, but we're still family. You're still my son." For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the pull of those words. I felt something else entirely, a calm certainty that the tables had turned. I didn't respond to Dad's message right away. Instead, I let it sit there, glowing on my phone like a beacon of irony. For years, I had begged for a fraction of his attention, a crumb of recognition. Now, he was the one reaching out, and I was the one deciding whether his words had any weight at all. The balance of power had shifted, and I wasn't about to waste the moment. The first step was patience. Revenge, real revenge, wasn't about shouting or slamming doors. It was about silence, about making them stew in the consequences of their own choices. So I ignored him. Days passed, then weeks. The messages grew more frantic, more emotional. "I know I was hard on you. You can't hold this grudge forever. Don't punish the family for my mistakes." It was the same script he had always used, but now I was no longer a captive audience. Then came the opportunity one had been waiting for. Through Caleb's scattered updates and a few well-placed questions to people I still knew in town, I learned that Dad's financial troubles were worse than he let on. The small contracting business he had run for decades was teetering on bankruptcy. Word was spreading fast, clients pulling out, suppliers demanding payment, debts piling high. And the more desperate he became, the more he tried to hide it, clinging to his pride like it was the last piece of wood in a sinking ship. That's when I decided to act. I had been saving diligently, investing cautiously, and with my new job and steady promotions, I had quietly built a financial cushion. Not millions, but enough to matter. Enough to show I had done what Dad always swore I couldn't: create stability on my own. And now, I would use it not to bail him out, but to expose the lie he had been living. The next time Caleb reached out, I agreed to meet him again. This time, I was different, calmer, sharper, carrying myself with the kind of quiet authority that comes when you know you're the one holding the cards. We sat across from each other, and before he could start pleading on Dad's behalf, I laid it out. "Caleb," I said, "you wanted me to come back, to help. But you need to understand something. I'm not the same person who walked out of that house 8 months ago. I don't know Dad anything. Not after he threw me out, sold my things, erased me. If I do anything, it won't be for him. It will be for me." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure of what I meant. So I leaned in. "I know about the debts. I know the business is failing. And I know Dad's been telling people he can fix it if I come back. But here's the truth. I could help. I could write a check today and stabilize everything. And I'm not going to." The look on Caleb's face was almost enough on its own. Shock, fear, a flash of recognition that the brother he had dismissed for years was now the one in control. "But here's what I will do," I continued. "I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. That Dad's not the invincible man he pretends to be. That he gambled everything away and lost. And when people ask why I didn't step in, I'll tell them, because when I needed him, he tossed me onto the lawn like garbage." Caleb tried to interrupt, stammering something about family and forgiveness, but I cut him off. "No, family isn't something you erase when it's inconvenient. Family isn't something you sell at a yard sale. Dad made his choice. Now he can live with it." I walked out before he could respond, the weight of years of humiliation finally lifting with each step. For once, I wasn't reacting. I was leading. And that night, when Dad called again, I finally answered. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I spoke with the calmness of someone who had already won. "You always told me to prove you wrong," I said. "Well, I did. I built a life without you. And now, when you need me most, I'm proving something else. You can't erase me and then come crawling back when it's convenient. You made your choice. This is mine." Then I hung up. The silence that followed was more powerful than any argument we had ever had. For the first time, I wasn't the powerless son trying to earn his place. I was the one closing the door. But revenge has a way of rippling out farther than you expect. And what happened next in the family, the fallout I hadn't even planned, was more devastating than anything I could have orchestrated myself. When I hung up that night, I thought the story was finished, that my silence and refusal were the final word. But what I didn't realize was that my father's world was already crumbling, and my choice not to save him didn't just seal his fate. It accelerated it. Within weeks, the news began to spread. The business, the one he had paraded around town as the symbol of his hard work and dominance, folded. Clients who had once praised him cut ties overnight. Suppliers came knocking for unpaid bills, and when they realized there was no money, lawsuits followed. The man who had always strutted around with his chin high, who mocked me for being weak, was now the subject of whispers and pity. In a small town, reputation is everything, and his had shattered. Caleb tried to keep up appearances, but it wasn't long before cracks showed. Without Dad's financial support, he was exposed. The flashy clothes, the trips, the arrogance, all of it had been built on Dad's wallet. He called me again, this time not with smugness, but desperation. "Elias, please," he said, his voice shaking. "You don't understand. We're drowning here." And for the first time, I understood perfectly. This was the same brother who had mocked me from my old room, who had basked in being the golden child. Now he was realizing that the pedestal he had been placed on was crumbling beneath him. I didn't yell. I didn't gloat. I simply told him, "You'll figure it out," the way I had to. And then I hung up. My mother, who had always been the quiet mediator, finally reached out too. Her message was different, less demanding, more sorrowful. "I should have done more," she admitted. "I should have stopped him." I didn't reply. I couldn't. Because no matter how much she claimed regret, her silence during all those years had been its own kind of betrayal. And while part of me still loved her, I couldn't carry her guilt too. As for Dad, his final message came on a Sunday morning. The same day, I moved into a new apartment. Bigger, brighter, paid for entirely by me. It wasn't long, just a single line. I was wrong. I stared at it for a long time, my chest tight, memories flooding back of every insult, every dismissal, every time he had told me I'd never be enough. And now here it was, an admission too late to matter. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. His silence after that message was louder than anything he could have said. Months passed, and I heard through the grapevine that he had sold the house. The same house he had thrown me out of. The same lawn where my belongings had been scattered like trash. He downsized into a small rental on the edge of town, a shadow of the man who once towered over everyone. People no longer respected him. They pitied him. And in many ways, that was worse for him than anything I could have done. I, on the other hand, kept rising. Promotions, opportunities, friendships rebuilt. My life was no longer defined by his approval or his rejection. I had carved out my own space in the world, one that no one could take away. One evening, after another long day at work, I drove past the old house. A for sale sign leaned crooked in the yard, the paint peeling from the shutters, the once manicured lawn overgrown. I pulled over for just a moment, staring at the place that had once been both my prison and my proving ground. And then, without a word, I drove away. Not in anger, not in sadness, but in peace. Because for the first time, I understood revenge wasn't about destroying him. It was about walking away whole while he crumbled under the weight of his own choices. And I had done just that.